The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the dusty general store, and Violet Winters pressed a handkerchief to her mouth as another cough tore through her chest, each spasm feeling like broken glass scraping her lungs raw. She had traveled 3 weeks from Boston to Santa Rosa, California, in 1882, answering an advertisement from a rancher named Roland Sullivan who needed a wife to help manage his homestead, and now she wondered if she would survive long enough to meet the man who had paid for her passage west. The cough had started somewhere in Nebraska, a tickle at first, then growing worse with each passing mile until she could barely draw breath without her body convulsing. "Miss Winters?" A deep voice cut through the haze of her discomfort, and she looked up to see a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer standing beside the coach door. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his angular face, and his hands, calloused and strong, reached up to help her down. "I'm Roland Sullivan." She tried to speak, to greet him properly, but another cough seized her before she could form words. Roland's expression shifted from polite greeting to immediate concern as he steadied her with one hand on her elbow. The other passengers were already dispersing into the small town, eager to stretch their legs and find refreshment after the long journey. "How long have you been coughing like that?" he asked, his voice steady but urgent. Violet finally caught her breath enough to whisper, 2 weeks, maybe more. It started on the plains." Roland wasted no time. He retrieved her trunk from the back of the coach, hefted it onto one broad shoulder, and guided her toward a horse tied near the general store. "We need to get you to the ranch. I have medicine there that might help." She wanted to protest, to tell him she just needed rest, but another fit of coughing stole her voice. Roland lifted her onto the horse with surprising gentleness, then swung up behind her, keeping one arm around her waist to steady her as they rode. The warmth of his body against her back was oddly comforting, and despite her illness, Violet felt a flutter of something other than fear for the first time since leaving Boston. The Sullivan Ranch sat about 3 miles outside Santa Rosa, nestled in a valley where oak trees provided shade and a creek ran clear and cold. The house was modest but well built, with a wide porch and windows that caught the afternoon light. Roland helped her down from the horse and led her inside, setting her trunk by the door before guiding her to a chair in the main room. "I am going to make you something," he said, already moving toward the kitchen area. "My mother was half Miwok, and she taught me about plants that grow around here. There is a remedy that should help with that cough." Violet watched through watery eyes as Roland worked with practiced efficiency. He pulled dried leaves from jars on a high shelf, measured them carefully, and set water to boil on the cast iron stove. His movements were precise, confident, and she found herself studying him despite her discomfort. He was younger than she had expected, probably no more than 26 or 27 to her own 22 years. His letters had been formal and somewhat stiff, giving her little sense of the man himself, but here in his home, she glimpsed someone thoughtful and capable. "This will taste bitter," Roland warned as he brought her a steaming cup 15 minutes later. "But it should ease the inflammation in your throat and lungs. My mother used it whenever any of us got sick during the wet seasons." Violet took the cup with trembling hands and sipped carefully. He was right about the taste. It was intensely bitter with an earthy undertone, but the warmth felt good going down her raw throat. Roland pulled up a chair and sat across from her, his expression serious. "I should have asked more questions in my letters," he said quietly. "About your health, about what the journey would be like. This is my fault." She shook her head, then regretted the motion as it triggered another cough. When she could speak again, her voice was hoarse. "You could not have known. I was healthy when I left Boston. The dust on the plains, the dry air. Something started this." "Still," Roland said, and she heard genuine remorse in his tone. "You came all this way to marry a stranger, and now you are sick because of it." Violet looked at him over the rim of the cup, really looked at him. His face was lined with sun and wind, but his eyes held kindness. "I came west because I had nothing left in Boston. My parents died last year, and I had no other family. Working in a factory for pennies would have killed me just as surely as this cough. At least here I have a chance. Something shifted in Roland's expression, a softening around his eyes. Then we will make sure you get better. I will make you medicine every day until that cough is gone. True to his word, Roland became her devoted caretaker over the following days. He prepared the herbal remedy 3 times daily, adjusting the mixture as her symptoms evolved. In the mornings, he added honey from his own beehives to soothe her throat. In the afternoons, he brewed a different tea with eucalyptus leaves that helped her breathe easier. At night, he made a thick syrup from wild cherry bark that suppressed the worst of the coughing fits. Violet slept in Roland's bedroom while he took the small room he had been using for storage. She protested this arrangement, but he was adamant. "You need proper rest, and that room has the best ventilation," he said firmly. "I will not hear another word about it." As the days passed and Violet began to feel incrementally better, she learned more about the man who had brought her west. Roland had inherited the ranch from his father 5 years earlier, after both his parents died in an influenza outbreak. He ran cattle on the surrounding hills and grew vegetables in a garden behind the house. He was respected in Santa Rosa, known for his honesty and his skill with horses. He was also lonely, though he did not say it directly. Violet could see it in the way he lingered when bringing her meals, in how he seemed eager to talk about even mundane things. "Tell me about Boston," Roland said one evening as he sat beside her bed, bringing her the night remedy. "What was it like growing up there?" Violet had been propped up on pillows, and the cough had been less severe that day. "Crowded," she said with a small smile. "And loud. There were always carriages in the streets, people everywhere. My father worked as a clerk for a shipping company, and we lived in a small house near the harbor. I could hear the ship's bells at night." "Do you miss it?" Roland asked, his eyes searching her face. She considered the question carefully. "I miss my parents. I miss feeling like I belonged somewhere. But the city itself? No, I do not think so. This is different, quieter, but there is something honest about it." Roland nodded slowly. "It can be hard country. The summers are hot and dry, and sometimes we go months without rain. But when spring comes and the hills turn green, there is nowhere else I would rather be." Violet found herself wanting to see that spring, to experience the transformation Roland described. More than that, she found herself wanting to know this man better, to understand the careful way he mixed medicines and the gentle tone he used when speaking to his horses. By the end of the second week, Violet was strong enough to sit on the porch for short periods. Roland would bring her tea and sit with her, pointing out landmarks in the distance and telling her stories about the ranch. He talked about his mother's people, the Miwok, who had lived in these valleys for generations before the settlers came. He spoke with respect and some sadness about how much had changed, how many of the old ways had been lost. "My mother tried to teach me everything she knew," Roland said one afternoon, as they watched the sun lower toward the western hills. "The plants, the seasons, the stories. I was young and stupid, and I did not always listen. I wish I had paid more attention." "You remembered enough to help me," Violet said softly. "That knowledge saved my life, Roland. Your mother would be proud." He turned to look at her, and something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. Violet felt her heart quicken, and she realized with a start that she was beginning to care for this man, not just as her benefactor, but as something more. The third week brought a turning point. Violet's cough had diminished to occasional tickles rather than the constant, racking spasms that had plagued her. She was able to help with small tasks around the house, though Roland still insisted she rest frequently. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side in the kitchen or sitting together in the evening while Roland read aloud from books he kept on a shelf beside the fireplace. One morning, Violet woke to find Roland already in the kitchen, preparing not just her medicine, but also breakfast. The smell of frying bacon and fresh bread filled the house, and she realized she was truly hungry for the first time since arriving in California. "You are looking better," Roland said when she appeared in the doorway. "There is color in your cheeks again." Violet touched her face self-consciously. "I feel better, thanks to you." Roland set down the spatula he had been using and turned to face her fully. "Violet, we need to talk about our arrangement." Her heart sank. She had known this conversation was coming, but she had been dreading it. Roland had advertised for a wife, not an invalid to nurse back to health. Surely he would want to discuss releasing her from their agreement, sending her back to Boston, or perhaps just to town where she could find work. "I understand," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "You did not sign up for this. I will not hold you to anything." Roland's brow furrowed in confusion. "Hold me to what?" "Violet, I am trying to say that once you are fully recovered, if you still want to, I would like us to marry properly. Not because of some advertisement or arrangement, but because I have come to care for you these past weeks." Violet stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You care for me?" "I do," Roland said simply. "More than I expected to. You are strong, Violet. You came all this way alone, and even sick, you have not complained or given up. You have a good heart. I see it in how you talk about your parents, in how you treat the animals. I want you to stay, but only if that is what you want too." Tears pricked Violet's eyes, but they were tears of relief and joy rather than sadness. "I want to stay," she whispered. "I have been so worried that you would send me away. But these weeks with you, Roland, they have been the happiest I have felt since losing my family. I care for you too." Roland crossed the small kitchen in 2 strides and took her hands in his. "Then we will do this right. We will take our time, let you get completely well, and when you are ready, we will marry." Violet squeezed his hands, feeling the roughness of his calluses against her palms. "I am already sure," she said, "but I will wait if that is what you want." "I want you to be certain," Roland said. "This is a hard life out here. I want you to know what you are choosing." Over the next few weeks, Roland made good on his promise to let Violet truly understand ranch life. He took her on rides around the property, showing her the cattle that grazed on the hillsides and the fence lines that needed constant maintenance. He taught her how to milk the 2 cows he kept for dairy, how to collect eggs from the chickens, and how to tend the vegetable garden that provided much of their food. Violet threw herself into learning, determined to prove she could handle this life. Her cough continued to improve with Roland's daily medicines until finally, one morning in early spring, she woke without any urge to cough at all. She lay in bed for a moment, breathing deeply and clearly, hardly believing the relief she felt. Roland noticed immediately at breakfast. "The cough is gone," he said, his face breaking into a wide smile that transformed his usually serious expression. "It is," Violet confirmed, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. "I can breathe without pain. I feel like myself again." "This calls for a celebration," Roland declared. "Get dressed. We are going into town." Santa Rosa was bustling when they arrived late that morning. Roland helped Violet down from the wagon and offered her his arm as they walked along the main street. He took her to the general store first, where he insisted on buying her fabric for new dresses and a bonnet to protect her face from the sun. Then they visited the butcher, the baker, and finally stopped at a small restaurant where they ate lunch together. "Everyone is staring at us," Violet whispered as they sat at a corner table. Roland glanced around and shrugged. "Let them stare. They are curious about you, that is all. A new face in town is big news out here." After lunch, Roland led her to a small church at the end of the main street. The pastor, a kindly older man named Reverend Matthews, greeted them warmly. "Roland Sullivan, It has been too long since I have seen you in services, the Reverend said with gentle chiding. Then he turned to Violet with interest. And this must be the young lady I have heard about. This is Violet Winters, Roland said, and Violet heard pride in his voice. We would like to discuss getting married, Reverend. Reverend Matthews beamed. Wonderful news. Come, let us sit and talk about what you have in mind. They spent an hour with the Reverend, discussing their intentions and scheduling a wedding for the following month. Violet had suggested waiting longer, but Roland had been insistent that he did not want to wait any more than necessary, and she had to admit she felt the same way. The ride back to the ranch that evening was peaceful. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Violet felt a contentment she had never known before. Roland reached over and took her hand as he drove the wagon, and she leaned against his shoulder. Are you happy? He asked quietly. I am, Violet said. Happier than I have been in a very long time. The month before the wedding passed quickly. Violet worked on sewing her wedding dress from the fabric Roland had bought, sitting on the porch in the afternoons where the light was best. Roland continued to make her herbal teas, though now they were for general health rather than to treat her cough. He said he wanted to build up her strength for the challenges ahead. They also grew more comfortable with each other, more open with their affections. Roland would kiss her cheek before heading out to work in the mornings. Violet would rest her hand on his arm as they sat together in the evenings. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their hopes for the future, the practical realities of running the ranch together. I want children eventually, Roland admitted one night. Not right away, but someday. I grew up with 3 brothers, and even though it was chaotic, I loved having family around. I would like that too, Violet said. I always imagined having a large family, though with just me, my parents could not give me siblings. How many? Roland asked with a teasing smile. Violet pretended to consider seriously. At least 4, maybe 5. Roland laughed, a sound that Violet had come to cherish because it was still rare. You say that now, but wait until you are chasing toddlers around the ranch. The wedding took place on a warm April morning in 1882. Violet wore her new dress, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Roland wore his best suit, and his hair was neatly combed for once. Several ranching families from the area attended, along with people from town who knew Roland. As Violet walked down the short aisle of the church, she caught Roland's eye and saw such open joy in his face that it took her breath away. This man, who had been a stranger just 2 months ago, who had nursed her through illness and shown her such patient kindness, was about to become her husband. It felt like a miracle. Reverend Matthews led them through their vows, and when Roland kissed her as his wife, Violet felt tears of happiness sliding down her cheeks. The small gathering erupted in applause, and then they were swept into a reception at the church hall where neighbors had brought food and drinks to celebrate. I am so happy for Roland, an older woman named Mrs. Peterson told Violet as they stood near the refreshment table. He has been alone too long since his parents passed. You are good for him. I can see it in how he looks at you. Violet blushed but smiled. He saved my life. I would have died from that cough if not for his medicines. That is our Roland, Mrs. Peterson said warmly. Always helping others. His mother would be so proud of the man he became. The celebration continued into the afternoon, and by the time Roland and Violet returned to the ranch, both were exhausted but happy. Roland carried her over the threshold of their home, a tradition Violet had read about but never expected to experience. Welcome home, Mrs. Sullivan, Roland said as he set her down gently. Violet wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him properly for the first time. I am home, she whispered against his lips. Finally home. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, both of them nervous but eager. Roland was patient and gentle, making sure Violet was comfortable every step of the way. When they lay together afterward, Violet resting her head on Roland's chest, she felt a completeness she had not known was possible. I love you, Roland said into the darkness of their bedroom. I should have said it before, but I was afraid. I love you, Violet. I love you too, Violet replied, her voice thick with emotion. I did not expect to fall in love when I came west, but I have, completely and utterly. The following months were among the happiest of Violet's life. She thrived in her new role as Roland's wife and partner. Together they worked the ranch, tending to the cattle and expanding the vegetable garden. Violet learned to ride well, and she often accompanied Roland when he checked on the herd in the far pastures. She also took over most of the cooking, learning to prepare the simple but hearty meals that sustained them through long work days. Roland continued to make her teas and tonics, now focused on overall health rather than treating illness. He taught her about the plants he used, taking her on walks through the surrounding hills to show her where different herbs grew. Violet proved an eager student, and soon she was helping him gather and prepare medicines. You have a natural talent for this, Roland said one afternoon as they worked together drying herbs in the kitchen. My mother would have liked you very much. Violet looked up from the bundles she was tying. I wish I could have met her. She sounds like an amazing woman. She was, Roland said quietly. Strong and wise. She had to be, married to a white rancher and raising mixed children in a time when that was not always accepted. But she never let anyone make her feel less than. She taught us to be proud of who we were. You honor her memory, Violet said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. In how you live and how you use what she taught you. That matters, Roland. By late summer, Violet suspected she might be pregnant. She waited a few more weeks to be certain before telling Roland, wanting to be sure. When she finally shared the news one evening after supper, Roland's reaction was everything she had hoped for. A baby? He said, his voice full of wonder. Violet, are you certain? As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor, she said, smiling at his excitement. I thought we might go to town next week so I can be properly examined. Roland pulled her into his arms, holding her close. A baby, he repeated as if trying to make it real. We are going to have a baby. The visit to the doctor in Santa Rosa confirmed what Violet already knew. She was about 3 months along, which meant the baby would arrive sometime in late winter or early spring. The doctor, an older gentleman named Dr. Harrison, examined her thoroughly and pronounced her in excellent health. Whatever your husband has been giving you is working, doctor, Harrison said as he wrote notes in a ledger. Your lungs are clear and you are strong. Keep doing what you are doing and you should have an easy pregnancy. Roland looked almost smug as they left the doctor's office. I told you my mother's medicines worked. You were right, Violet admitted, laughing at his expression. About everything. They spent the rest of the day in town, buying supplies and spreading the news of the coming baby. The reaction was universally positive, with neighbors and shopkeepers offering congratulations and advice. By the time they headed back to the ranch, Violet felt embraced by the community in a way she had never experienced in Boston. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Violet continued to work on the ranch as long as she was able, though Roland became increasingly protective as her belly grew. He insisted she rest more, take fewer risks, and always drink the special teas he prepared to ensure her health and the baby's. I am not made of glass, Violet protested one December afternoon when Roland refused to let her help mend a fence. I know that, Roland said, his tone gentle but firm. But you are carrying our child, and I will not take any chances with either of you. Please, Violet, let me take care of you. How could she argue with that? So Violet spent more time in the house as winter deepened, sewing baby clothes and preparing the small room that would serve as a nursery. Roland had carved a beautiful cradle from oak, working on it in the evenings by lamplight. Watching his large, capable hands shape the wood with such care made Violet fall even more deeply in love with him. What should we name the baby? Violet asked one evening as they sat by the fire, her hands resting on her swollen belly. Roland considered the question. If it is a boy, I would like to name him after my father, Joseph, if that is all right with you. Joseph Sullivan, Violet said, testing the name. I like it. And if it is a girl, you choose, Roland said, reaching over to place his hand over hers on her stomach. Whatever name you want. Violet thought about it for several days before deciding. Clara, she said finally, after my mother. Clara Winter Sullivan. Clara, Roland repeated, smiling. That is perfect. The baby came on a cold February night in 1883. Violet's labor started in the late afternoon, and Roland immediately rode to town to fetch Dr. Harrison and Mrs. Peterson, who had experience as a midwife. By the time they returned, Violet's contractions were coming regularly, and she was grateful for their presence. Labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the early morning hours. Roland stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with cool cloths. He made her sip water between contractions and spoke encouraging words when she felt like giving up. You can do this, he kept saying. You are the strongest person I know, Violet. Just a little more. Finally, as the sun was rising over the eastern hills, their baby was born. A boy, healthy and loud, with a thick head of dark hair and his father's strong features. Joseph, Violet whispered, as Dr. Harrison placed the cleaned and swaddled infant in her arms. Hello, Joseph. Roland leaned over them both, his eyes suspiciously bright. He is perfect, he said hoarsely. Violet, he is absolutely perfect. The first months of Joseph's life were exhausting but joyful. Violet had never known she could love someone so fiercely and completely. Roland proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to bring the baby to Violet for feeding and changing diapers without complaint. He made special teas for Violet to help with milk production and recovery from childbirth, always attentive to both her needs and the baby's. You are going to spoil me, Violet told him one afternoon as he brought her lunch while she nursed Joseph. That is the plan, Roland said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. You gave me a son, Violet. I can never repay that. You saved my life, Violet reminded him. I think we are even. As Joseph grew, Violet marveled at how much he resembled Roland. The same serious expression, the same intense gaze. But he had her smile, or so Mrs. Peterson claimed when she visited to check on them. By the time Joseph was 6 months old, Violet felt like herself again. Her body had recovered from childbirth, and though she was often tired from the demands of caring for an infant, she was happy. Roland had hired a young man named Tom to help with the ranch work, giving him more time to spend with his family. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset with Joseph sleeping in Violet's arms, Roland said, Do you remember when you first arrived here? How sick you were? I remember thinking I was going to die, Violet admitted, and being terrified that I had made a terrible mistake coming west. I was terrified too, Roland confessed. Not that you had made a mistake, but that I would not be able to help you, that you would die and it would be my fault for bringing you here. Violet shifted Joseph so she could reach over and take Roland's hand. You did help me. You saved me, Roland. And then you gave me this life, this family. I could never regret coming to California. Even with all the hard work and isolation, Roland asked. Even with that, Violet confirmed. Because I have you, because I have Joseph. This is everything I never knew I needed. Roland lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. I love you, Violet Sullivan, more than I can ever properly say. I love you too, Violet said softly. Always. The years that followed were full and rich. Joseph grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who followed his father everywhere, learning about the ranch and the animals. When he was 2, Violet gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Clara as planned. She had Violet's light brown hair and Roland's green eyes, a beautiful combination that made everyone who met her comment on her prettiness. 2 years after Clara came another son, whom they named Samuel. He was quieter than Joseph, but just as determined, and he showed an early interest in the plants and medicines that Roland made. Then came another daughter, Margaret, with dark hair and a sunny disposition that lit up every room she entered. The ranch prospered as the family grew. Roland expanded his herd and began breeding horses as well as cattle, a venture that proved profitable. Violet managed the household and helped with the ranch work when she could, though with 4 young children, her hands were often full. They hired additional help, including a young woman named Emma, who assisted with childcare and household tasks. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Roland surprised Violet by taking her on a trip to San Francisco. Emma stayed at the ranch with the children, and for 3 glorious days, Roland and Violet were just a couple again, exploring the city and enjoying each other's company without the demands of parenthood. "This is wonderful," Violet said as they sat in a restaurant overlooking the bay. "But I miss them already." Roland laughed. "So do I. But it is good for us to have this time together, too, to remember why we fell in love in the first place." "I could never forget that," Violet said. "You made me medicine every day until I was well. You showed me what real love looks like, Roland. Patient and kind and constant. You made it easy to love you," Roland said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "From the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, coughing and fragile but still determined, I knew you were special." They returned home to chaos as all 4 children rushed to greet them. Joseph, now 9 years old and tall for his age, helped carry their bags. Clara, at 7, chattered about everything that had happened while they were gone. Samuel, 5, showed them a bird's nest he had found. And little Margaret, just 3, simply wrapped her arms around Violet's legs and refused to let go. "I think they missed us," Roland said dryly, though his eyes were soft as he looked at his children. Life settled back into its familiar rhythms, but Violet found herself feeling occasionally restless. She loved her family fiercely, but she also wanted to do more. She had been thinking about this for some time, and finally, one evening after the children were in bed, she broached the subject with Roland. "I want to learn more about medicine," she said, as they sat together in the parlor, a rare moment of quiet. "Not just the remedies you have taught me, but more formal knowledge. I think I could help people in town, especially women and children who might not want to see Dr. Harrison." Roland looked thoughtful. "That is a good idea. Dr. Harrison is getting older, and Santa Rosa is growing. They could use someone else with medical knowledge." "You are not opposed?" Violet asked, surprised by his immediate support. "Why would I be opposed?" Roland said. "You are smart and capable, and you already know more about herbal medicine than most people. If you want to expand that knowledge, I will help however I can." So Violet began studying. Dr. Harrison, when approached, was enthusiastic about mentoring her. He loaned her medical texts and invited her to observe him when he treated patients. Violet absorbed everything, studying late into the night after the children were asleep and practicing her skills on family and neighbors. Within 2 years, Violet had become known throughout Santa Rosa and the surrounding area as someone who could help with illnesses and injuries, particularly those affecting women and children. She did not charge much, often accepting payment in goods or services, and her reputation for kindness and competence grew. Roland supported her work completely, adjusting his schedule to care for the children when Violet was called away to help someone. He was proud of her, and he told her so often. "You have come so far from that sick young woman on the stagecoach," he said one evening, as Violet prepared her medical bag for a house call the next day. "I am amazed by you, Violet." "I had a good teacher," Violet said, moving to wrap her arms around his waist. "Everything I know about healing started with you, with those medicines you made for me every single day." "We make a good team," Roland said, holding her close. "The best team," Violet agreed. When Joseph turned 16 in 1899, he announced his intention to study veterinary medicine. He had always loved working with the animals on the ranch, and Violet and Roland were both supportive of his ambitions. Clara, at 14, showed artistic talent and talked about becoming a teacher. Samuel, 12, wanted to follow in his father's footsteps and run the ranch. And Margaret, 10, declared that she would be a doctor like her mother, though Violet gently reminded her that she was not technically a doctor. You should be, Margaret said stubbornly. You help more people than Dr. Harrison does. Dr. Harrison had retired the previous year, and a younger doctor named Dr. Williams had taken over his practice. He and Violet worked well together, and he often referred patients to her, particularly for herbal treatments and women's health issues. As the new century dawned in 1900, Violet found herself reflecting on the incredible journey her life had taken. She was 40 years old now, and Roland was 44. They had been married for 18 years, and those years had been filled with love, hard work, challenges, and triumphs. One spring morning, as Violet was working in her herb garden behind the house, Roland came to find her. He had gray threading through his dark hair now, and there were deeper lines around his eyes, but to Violet, he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him. Do you remember what today is? Roland asked, settling onto the bench beside the garden. Violet thought for a moment, then smiled. April 15th, the day we were married. 18 years, Roland said. It seems impossible that so much time has passed. And yet it also feels like we have always been together, Violet added. She set down her gardening tools and moved to sit beside him. What a life we have built, Roland. We, Roland emphasized, taking her hand. Nothing I have accomplished would have been possible without you, Violet. You are my partner in every way that matters. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching butterflies drift among the herbs and listening to the sounds of the ranch around them. In the distance, they could hear Samuel calling to one of the horses. Closer in the house, Margaret was practicing piano, the notes occasionally discordant but enthusiastic. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not known how to make those medicines? Violet asked quietly. If I had not recovered from that cough? I try not to think about it, Roland admitted. Because the alternative is unbearable. You are my whole world, Violet. You and the children. I cannot imagine life without you. You saved me, Violet said, not for the first time over their years together. In every way, a person can be saved. You gave me health, you gave me love, you gave me purpose. I was so lost when I came west, Roland. So alone. And you made me whole again. Roland turned to face her fully, his eyes serious and full of emotion. You saved me too. I was existing before you came, just going through the motions of life. But you brought joy and meaning back. You gave me a reason to build something beyond just survival. I need you to know that, Violet. We saved each other. Tears pricked Violet's eyes, the good kind that came from being understood completely. She leaned her head against Roland's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. What do you want to do to celebrate our anniversary? Roland asked after a moment. This, Violet said simply. Just this. Being together, knowing our children are happy and healthy, having this moment of peace. This is everything. But Roland, as he often did, had other plans. That evening after supper, he gathered the whole family in the parlor. Joseph was home from his veterinary studies for a few weeks, and all 4 children were present, looking curious about their father's mysterious announcement. Your mother and I have been married for 18 years today, Roland began, and the children immediately broke into applause and congratulations. He held up a hand for quiet. I wanted to mark this occasion with something special, so I have arranged for your Aunt Emma to stay with you for the next 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Clara asked, looking confused. Where are you going? Your mother and I are taking a trip, Roland announced, smiling at Violet's shocked expression. Back to the places where we started. Santa Rosa, of course, but also Sacramento and some of the territory your mother passed through when she came west. I want to show her that it is not all harsh and difficult. I want her to see the beauty of this land when she is not fighting to survive. Violet was speechless. The thoughtfulness of the gesture overwhelmed her. Roland had remembered how sick she had been during her journey, how she had seen so little of the landscape because of her illness. He wanted to give her new memories to replace those difficult ones. Roland, she finally managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. This is too much. It is not nearly enough, Roland said firmly. You deserve this, Violet. You deserve to see this place we call home through fresh eyes. The trip was everything Roland had promised, and more. They traveled north through the Sacramento Valley, staying in small hotels and visiting places Violet had passed through 18 years earlier in a fog of illness. They saw fields of wildflowers stretching to the horizon, ancient oak groves, and mountains still capped with snow. They ate meals in tiny restaurants and talked for hours about everything and nothing. In Sacramento, they visited the state capitol building and walked along the river. Roland bought Violet a beautiful shawl from a shop that specialized in goods from around the world. They attended a concert and danced together for the first time in years, swaying to the music under glittering chandeliers. Thank you, Violet said one evening as they stood on the balcony of their hotel room looking out over the city. For all of this, for never forgetting how we began. I could never forget, Roland said, pulling her close. Every morning when I make your tea, even though you do not need medicine anymore, I remember. I remember being so afraid that I would lose you before I even had a chance to know you, and I am grateful every single day that I did not. Roland still made Violet tea every morning, a habit that had never stopped even after her cough disappeared all those years ago. It was his way of showing love, of maintaining the connection that had first formed between them when she was at her most vulnerable. When they returned home, they were greeted by chaos, as usual. Margaret had learned a new piece on the piano and insisted on performing it immediately. Samuel had a new foal he wanted to show them. Clara had finished a painting of the ranch that was truly impressive. And Joseph had news of his own. He had met a young woman at school and wanted to bring her home to meet the family. So soon? Violet asked, though she was smiling. You are only 18, Joseph. You were 22 when you married Father, Joseph pointed out. And you had never even met him before. At least Lucy and I have been courting for several months. He had her there. So a month later, Joseph brought Lucy home, a sweet young woman studying to be a teacher. She was nervous at first, but the Sullivan family's warmth quickly put her at ease. Violet watched her eldest son with this girl and saw in his eyes the same look Roland still gave her, complete devotion mixed with tender protectiveness. A year later, Joseph and Lucy were married in the same small church where Violet and Roland had exchanged vows. It was a joyful occasion, and as Violet watched her son begin his own journey into married life, she felt the circle of life completing itself in the most beautiful way. Clara followed her brother down the aisle 2 years later, marrying a young banker from San Francisco named Thomas, whom she had met through friends. Their wedding was grander, held in the city, but no less meaningful. Samuel showed no interest in marriage yet, focused entirely on learning every aspect of running the ranch from his father. And Margaret, true to her word, began studying medicine with Violet as her primary teacher. She is better than I was at her age, Violet told Roland one evening as they prepared for bed. They were in their late 40s now, their hair graying and their faces showing the wear of decades of hard work, but to each other they remained as attractive as ever. She has an excellent teacher, Roland said, climbing into bed beside Violet and pulling her close. And she has your compassionate heart. That matters more than knowledge alone. Violet settled against Roland's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. This was still her favorite place in the world, wrapped in her husband's arms, safe and loved. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? Violet asked. If you had not known about medicine, if I had died from that cough. I told you, I try not to think about it, Roland said, but his arms tightened around her. But sometimes, in quiet moments, I do wonder. and it makes me appreciate what we have even more. We were given a gift, Violet, a second chance at life when you could have easily died. I never want to take that for granted. Neither do I, Violet whispered. Every day with you is a gift, Roland. Every single day. They fell asleep that way, holding each other close, just as they had done every night for over 20 years. The next decade brought more changes. Joseph and Lucy had 3 children, making Violet and Roland grandparents. Clara and Thomas had 2 children of their own. Samuel eventually married a rancher's daughter named Beth, and they settled on a portion of the Sullivan land that Roland had deeded to them. Margaret completed her medical training and opened a practice in Santa Rosa, though she still frequently consulted with Violet on difficult cases. Through it all, Roland continued his daily ritual of making Violet tea. Even in his late 50s, when his joints ached from decades of ranch work and his eyesight was not what it once was, he never failed to prepare her morning cup. Sometimes it was the same herbal blend he had first made to cure her cough. Other times it was different mixtures, designed to support health in different ways. But it was always made with love, always a reminder of how they had begun. You do not have to do this anymore, Violet told him gently one morning when she noticed him moving more slowly than usual. I am perfectly healthy, Roland. I have been for 30 years. I know, Roland said, carefully measuring dried herbs into the teapot. But I want to. It is my way of taking care of you, Violet. Let me have this. So Violet stopped protesting and simply accepted the love behind the gesture. She understood now that it was as much for Roland as it was for her, a way for him to express feelings that he sometimes still struggled to put into words. On their 35th wedding anniversary in 1917, their children organized a large celebration at the ranch. All 4 children were there with their families, along with neighbors and friends from town. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. Violet and Roland found themselves surrounded by love, by the family and community they had built over 3.5 decades. Look at all of this, Roland said to Violet as they surveyed the gathering from the porch. All these people, all this joy. We created this, Violet. Together. We did, Violet agreed, slipping her hand into his. And it all started with you making me medicine every day, with you refusing to let me give up or give in. You never needed me to save you, Roland said, turning to face her. You had the strength all along, Violet. I just helped you find it again. Violet stood on her toes to kiss him, not caring that their children and grandchildren could see. After 35 years of marriage, public displays of affection no longer embarrassed her. We saved each other, she said firmly. That is the truth of it, Roland. Neither of us would be who we are without the other. Roland cupped her face in his weathered hands and kissed her again, deeper this time. When they pulled apart, Violet saw tears in his eyes. I love you, he said hoarsely, more now than ever, if that is even possible. It is possible, Violet assured him, because I feel the same way. My love for you grows deeper every year, Roland. Every single day that you make me tea, every night that you hold me close, every moment we share. It all adds up to something too big for words. They were called back to the party then, their grandchildren tugging on their hands and demanding attention. But as the afternoon wore on, and the celebration continued around them, Violet kept catching Roland's eye across the crowd. And every time their gazes met, she felt the same flutter in her chest that she had experienced as a young bride, the same certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. As evening fell and their guests began to depart, the family gathered for one final toast. Joseph, as the eldest, did the honors. To my parents, he said, raising his glass, who taught us what real love looks like, who showed us that marriage is not just about romance, though they certainly have that. It is about partnership and respect and daily acts of care. My father has made my mother tea every morning for 35 years. That is love. That is commitment. That is what we all aspire to. Everyone raised their glasses and drank, and Violet felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Roland squeezed her hand, his own eyes bright with emotion. Later, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Roland and Violet sat on the porch in the cool evening air. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the sounds of the ranch settling for the night surrounded them. Tired? Roland asked. A little, Violet admitted, but happy. So very happy. Good, Roland said. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Violet, there is something I want to tell you, something I've been thinking about for a while now. Violet turned to look at him, suddenly concerned. What is it? Are you all right? I am fine, Roland assured her quickly. Better than fine, but I have been thinking about what Joseph said about the tea I make you every morning, and I realized something. That ritual, that daily act of making you medicine, it saved me too. What do you mean? Violet asked softly. Roland took a moment to gather his thoughts. When you first arrived, I was so focused on curing your cough, on keeping you alive. But as the days passed and you began to recover, I realized that the act of making medicine for you gave me purpose. It made me feel needed in a way I had not felt since my parents died. And even after you were completely well, I could not stop, because it had become my way of showing you every single day that you matter to me, that your health and happiness are my first priority, that I will never stop taking care of you. Violet was crying openly now, moved by the depth of emotion in Roland's words. Oh, Roland! So you see, Roland continued, his voice rough with feeling, you did not just let me save you all those years ago. You let me discover who I was meant to be. A healer, a husband, a father. Everything good in my life stems from that moment when I helped you down from that stagecoach and saw how much you were suffering. You gave me the chance to be the man I wanted to be. Violet moved closer and took both of Roland's hands in hers. We are quite a pair, she said through her tears. Two lost souls who found each other and built something beautiful. The most beautiful thing, Roland agreed. A life, a family, a love that has endured through everything. They sat together until the moon rose high overhead, talking about the past and dreaming about the future. They talked about watching their grandchildren grow, about the possibility of great-grandchildren someday. They talked about growing old together on this land they both loved, surrounded by the family they had created. I hope we have many more years together, Violet said as they finally rose to go inside. We will, Roland said with certainty, because I am not done making you tea yet. I have at least 30 more years of medicine to prepare. Violet laughed, the sound light and joyful. Then I suppose I had better stick around to drink it. You had better, Roland said, pulling her close for one more kiss under the stars. They walked into the house together, hand in hand, just as they had done every night for 35 years. And as Roland helped Violet prepare for bed, treating her with the same gentle care he had shown that first week when she was so ill, Violet felt overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west as a desperate young woman with no family and no prospects, sick and alone on a stagecoach to meet a stranger. She had nearly died from a cough that would not stop, but Roland Sullivan had refused to let that happen. He had made her medicine every single day, had nursed her back to health with patience and skill, and in doing so had won her heart completely. And now, 3.5 decades later, she had everything she had never dared to dream of. A husband who loved her deeply, children who made her proud, grandchildren who brought joy, and a community that valued her. She had become a healer herself, helping others the way Roland had once helped her. She had lived a full, meaningful life in this wild, beautiful country. As Violet drifted off to sleep that night, wrapped in Roland's arms, her last thought was one of profound contentment. This was happiness, she realized. Not the absence of hardship or difficulty, but the presence of love that endured through everything. love that showed itself in daily acts of care, in medicine made faithfully every morning, in hands held through both joy and sorrow. She had found her home, not just in California or on the Sullivan Ranch, but in the heart of the man who had saved her life and then built a life with her. And that, Violet knew, was the greatest gift of all. The years continued to pass gently. Roland and Violet grew older, but never less devoted to each other. Their children flourished, their grandchildren grew, and eventually, great-grandchildren arrived to carry on the Sullivan name and legacy. Through it all, Roland continued his morning ritual, making Violet tea with the same care and attention he had shown that first week in 1882. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1932, when both were in their 70s, the family gathered once more for a celebration. It was smaller than previous gatherings, as Roland and Violet preferred quiet these days, but no less meaningful. Their 4 children were all there, along with spouses, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. 50 years! Violet marveled as she and Roland sat in chairs of honor, watching their family mingle. Can you believe it has been 50 years, Roland? Feels like both forever and no time at all, Roland said. His hair was completely white now, and his hands trembled slightly from age. But his eyes were still the same creek water green that had captured Violet's attention all those decades ago. Margaret approached them, a smile on her face. She was a successful doctor now, respected throughout the county, and she had never married, claiming she was too devoted to her work. But she had inherited both her mother's compassion and her father's skill with medicine, and she had used those gifts to help countless people. I made something for you, Margaret said, holding out a leather-bound book. Open it. Violet opened the book carefully and found it filled with pressed flowers and herbs, each labeled with its medicinal use. On the first page, in Margaret's careful handwriting, were the words, "To my parents, who taught me that the greatest medicine is love. These are the plants Father used to heal Mother 50 years ago, and that they have both used to heal others ever since." Violet could not speak past the lump in her throat, so she just held the book to her chest and reached for Margaret's hand. Roland wrapped his arm around both of them, and they stayed that way for a long moment, 3 generations of healers united by love and purpose. That evening, after the celebration ended and the house grew quiet, Roland and Violet sat on their porch one last time, wrapped in blankets against the cool spring air. Roland had made them both tea, though his hands had shaken so much that Violet had helped him pour it into cups. "We have had a good life," Roland said simply. "The best life," Violet corrected. "Better than I ever imagined possible when I stepped off that stagecoach, coughing and scared and alone." "You were never alone," Roland said. "Not from the moment I saw you. You were mine from that first moment, even though I did not know it yet." Violet leaned her head on Roland's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body through the layers of clothing and blankets. "And you were mine, my rescuer, my healer, my love. Everything." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their tea and watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The ranch was quiet around them, settled and peaceful. Their children were safe and happy. Their legacy was secure. There was nothing left undone, no words left unsaid. "I love you, Violet Sullivan," Roland said into the twilight. "For 50 years I have loved you, and I will love you beyond this life and into whatever comes next." "And I love you, Roland Sullivan," Violet replied, her voice steady, despite the tears on her cheeks. "You saved my life with your medicine, but you gave me a reason to live with your love. I could never repay that debt." "There is no debt," Roland said firmly. "Only love, only gratitude for every day we have been given together." They finished their tea and went inside, helping each other navigate the familiar rooms of the house they had shared for 50 years. They prepared for bed slowly, their movements practiced from decades of routine. And when they finally lay down together, they curled into each other the way they always had, finding comfort in the familiar warmth and presence of their partner. "Good night, my love," Violet whispered. Good night, Roland replied. Sleep well. And there, wrapped in each other's arms in the home they had built together, surrounded by the love they had created and the legacy they would leave behind, Violet and Roland Sullivan drifted into peaceful sleep. They had lived fully and loved completely, and their story, which had begun with a cough that would not stop and medicine made with careful hands, had become a testament to the enduring power of devotion, partnership, and the choice to care for another person every single day. Their children would find them that way in the morning, still holding each other close, their faces peaceful. They had passed within hours of each other during the night, neither willing to exist in a world without the other. It was, everyone agreed, the perfect ending to a perfect love story. The Sullivan Ranch continued for generations after, run by Samuel's descendants who never forgot the story of their great-great-grandparents. The story of the mail-order bride who had a cough that would not stop, and the cowboy who made her medicine every day, who fell in love through acts of care and built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. In Santa Rosa, Margaret's medical practice became legendary, and she trained new doctors using the combination of traditional knowledge and herbal remedies her parents had taught her. The leather-bound book of pressed herbs became a family treasure, passed down through generations along with the story it represented. And every Sullivan child grew up hearing about Roland and Violet, about how true love showed itself not in grand gestures, but in daily acts of devotion, in medicine faithfully prepared, in hands held through sickness and health, in a commitment that lasted 50 years and beyond. It was a love story for the ages, born in the wild west of California in 1882, and it proved that sometimes the greatest adventures are not about conquering frontiers, but about building a life with another person, one day, one cup of tea, one moment of care at a time.